There's a verse out of Psalm 66, verse 16. It says, "Come and hear, all you who fear God, and I will tell what he has done for my soul." There is something powerful about sharing our personal story, what God has done in our life, what he has brought us through, and how he's moved. And so often on a Sunday morning, we get together and we sit next to all these people that we may not see the rest of the week, and we have a little greeting time, and you introduce yourself, and you get their name, and then you promptly forget their name, and then you have to get their name again the next week. But we never realize all the amazing stories that are seated all around us and the ways that God has been at work. And so I started something, I guess 4 years ago, 4 or 5 years ago, of the first Sunday of the new year, something we call Grace Stories. And we just give the service to hearing the stories from some of the people in our congregation. That's what we're going to do this morning. We've got 3 guests that are going to come up and tell us their story. And before we get into it, let's just dedicate this time to the Lord in prayer. Father God, thank you so much for the miracle that our stories are in your hands. The ways that you have worked in both good times and difficult times. The ways that you have drawn our attention to yourself. That your Son has come to reside in us and change us and guide us. I just thank you, Lord, for the miracle of this story that you work in our lives. I pray that as we listen to just 3 of those stories this morning, Lord, that you would be pleased, that you would guide the conversation, that you would open our hearts to hear what you want us to hear, and that this would really be just an act of praise to you for your goodness in our lives. And I ask this in Jesus' name, amen. Well, our first 2 guests, we're going to bring them up as a couple, are some folks that Burnett and I really got to know in their home before they ever moved to Sequim. In fact, at that point, we had no idea they would end up in Sequim. But we got to know them and then just had the joy of them becoming part of our church family and a significant part of our church family. And I thought that you all would like to hear a little more of their story. You know them, you've seen them, but you may not know where they've come from. And so I'm going to invite Pastor Britt and Gail Hemphill to come up and share their story with us. Come on up, guys. Who is that young couple up there? Oh, you guys. It's great having you here. It's been, how long now you've been at DCC?
Coming up on 2 years.
2 years.
In April.
Yeah, and the first time I think I really got to know you guys was this trip Burnett and I were making, and somehow, because we supported you guys as missionaries for a lot of years, and so we sort of knew each other through that, but then you said, hey, why don't you stop by, and we actually spent a night at your place and had a great visit, and no idea you'd end up here.
No idea. I just got at work there to give an opportunity to meet Tim and Burnett, and then, utterly surprised when later on there'd be an opportunity for us to come and join this community, so.
It's been good. So you're a pastor of Children and Family Ministries, and Gail, you're a registered nurse, and you work at a cardiology clinic here in Sequim. Why don't we start with you? Let's talk about growing up. What was your childhood like? What were the spiritual influences, if any, for you growing up?
Well, I grew up as a military brat, an Army brat. My dad was in the Army, so moved a lot as a child. In fact, every year until we got to my middle school years. Was born into a family that both my mom and dad had a testimony of salvation and had shared that with me growing up, but beyond that, never really talked about their faith, and I really didn't see how faith integrated into our lives. It was just kind of an absent thing. But I'm thankful that they exposed me to Christianity. And in fact, my mom took me to a vacation Bible school when I was 5 years old. And that's where I clearly heard through the eyes of a child. The gospel was laid out, and it made sense to me. I knew as a 5-year-old that I was a sinner, and Jesus was the only way. And so when I came home that day, I asked my mom if I could pray and invite him into my heart, and I did.
So, from that point forward, what was your spiritual life like as a kid, as a teen?
You know, nothing really changed, to be honest. I didn't know really what to do at that point, but I knew that I was saved, and I knew I had a Savior, but I didn't really understand how that, fit into life. And I think I just went on and lived my life the way I very much wanted to, and built my own kingdom around myself. And but God was there, he was compartmentalized. He was right here. He just wasn't really an active part of my life.
Okay.
I wasn't pursuing him.
And now, in your growing up, you lived a bunch of places, like you said, because being the military brat. Where'd you guys live?
Well, my dad was a helicopter pilot, so we were at all the bases down, or posts, whatever you call them, in Virginia and Alabama and Georgia and all those places where he flew. We were in Germany for a couple years, but I was pretty small, so I don't really have a lot of memories of that.
Okay. Both of you actually spent certain portion of your childhood in the Deep South. Britt, you lived where for a bit?
Yeah, when I was probably from 2 to 8, we were in Clinton, Mississippi, and Jackson, Mississippi. So if you've seen the movie The Help, we were living in Jackson at the time that movie was made. So yeah, quite an interesting time to be young, and my parents were non-traditional in how they viewed people in general, so we had the opportunity to hear a different narrative than what most of the South embraced at the time. But yeah, very unique, a unique time for sure. Yep.
Yeah. And you experienced that too. I mean, you spent some time in the South during those years as well.
Yeah, I was actually in Alexandria, Virginia when Remember the Titans was filmed.
Interesting.
And I mean, not when it was filmed, but the story that takes place. And I was bused as a middle schooler a half hour away to an all-black school. And there was just a handful of white kids that were bused to this school. It was a very interesting experience. And yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, right in the thick of it.
Yeah, one of the things that you shared in your growing up that was a real jarring experience was with your brother. What happened there?
So when I was 11, there were 4 of us in our family, 4 children. My oldest brother was 17, and he was killed in an automobile accident as a 17-year-old. And as an 11-year-old, it just had it had a significant impact, obviously, on me and my family, a devastating impact. For me, it really, I was already a somewhat fearful child, but it really filled me with a lot of fear. Fears that I don't even really understand, but just lots of fear. Probably fear of death, but just a lot of fears. And at the time, I remember thinking that, God could help me with those fears, but I just didn't really understand what that looked like, how to access him. And I don't think my parents really understood how to bring him into our lives, and I watched them kind of walk through that. I don't know what was happening in their hearts quietly, but I know that they didn't really guide us as a family through that with the hope of Christ being spoken into it.
Wow.
So it kind of felt like a loss, and
Yeah.
on top
Yeah.
of a loss.
Britt, how about you? What was growing up like?
I was the oldest of 4 and born in Cincinnati, Ohio. And our kind of extended family was all in that area. And my dad was kind of a rogue black sheep in the family. So he was following his dreams wherever they led him. Gifted guy, very personable. He was a sales guy, could sell anything. But just had the itch to kind of move. So we ended up in the Deep South. He owned a piano store, Baldwin Piano and Organ Store. And then we, from there, moved to California, which the family thought was we had lost our minds. Okay, I mean, just California way out there on the west. And then we came back to Ohio for a little bit, and then back to California for the long haul. But really, my folks instilled this great sense of independence for us. We were not a family of faith. I mean, we'll talk about that maybe in a little bit, but really just we're kind of going with the flow. And our time in California on the second run was in the late 60s and early 70s in the San Francisco Bay Area, all right? So my folks immediately embraced kind of counterculture stuff. All our friends were long hairs and hippies. My folks were running wild with stuff way before I got running wild with stuff. And that is what was going on in our family. But I had this one thing going that kind of centered me where I couldn't get too far away from it, and that was swimming, which became this anchor point for me. And I'm not quite sure how it would have gone had I not had that going.
How old were you when you started swimming?
Yeah, I started when I was 5. My mom was my first coach. And I was in the water before I was walking. I mean, I was just a water baby. So started at 5 and then swam all the way through college at 21. So that is what I did for many, many, many years.
And I think a lot of people know, but you swam for UCLA on the team.
Yeah, swam for UCLA, great team, great memories of that time, but also still a connection to that community of swimmers even now as we move into our 60s. So it's been quite a legacy that I'm very thankful for. And many of you heard Dan Stevenson in the fall, right? That's a part of that legacy for me. So,
Any spiritual input? I think you mentioned one connection with Young Life at one point in your high school years. Did that have any impact?
Yeah, I somehow ended up at Woodleaf, which is the Young Life camp in California. Okay, Woodleaf, right? I was there. Robert, yes. Okay, nothing. Over my head, I don't remember anything about it. I remember the zip line. I remember being in the water, having fun with a friend of mine. I don't remember any of the spiritual stuff. The skits, all of that, but honestly, I think I missed all of it. Later, I couldn't even reflect on what that was about, other than God was saving up for some other circumstances later on where he would really dig in and get my attention.
Okay. So spiritually, you're kind of nowhere coming into college. You have this compartmentalized faith. You both end up in college, and that's where you meet. How does that happen?
It's a beautiful story. So I'm in grad school at the UW, and she is in nursing school at the UW. And she has friends who are in the sorority that I'm working at. I worked in a sorority, undergrad and graduate school, because I got great food. I mean, really great food, which meant a lot when I was swimming and even then when I graduated. So I was working a lunch, and she came to be with some of the friends that were in the house, and I cleared her dishes and thought, boy, I could do that for the rest of my life. And then next thing I know, she kind of came into the kitchen and said hi, and boy, swept away. Okay? That's what I recall. What's your recollection of that?
I thought, yeah, I would like you to clear my dishes for the rest of your life.
Match made in heaven, okay? Dirty dishes.
It really was a somewhat instant thing. I was very drawn to Britt the moment I met him. I just felt I felt safe with him. I felt just a freedom to be who I was with him. And I loved how, even in those moments when we first met, I loved how I got glimpses of how he sees the world, and I was very drawn into how he sees the world. And he notices things, he notices the beautiful things in the world, and that meant a lot to me because I'm a beauty seeker, so that was fun to connect that way.
Go ahead.
Well, just at the time, some of the girls in the house, and I wasn't dating, I was just there working and kind of doing my grad school thing and asking the question, is she out there somewhere? But I had become really good friends with some of the girls, and mostly seniors, and they just were great fun to be around in a way that I had not really encountered before, and just felt a friendship there and a comfort with them, and later would discover they were followers of Jesus. And so these were my first awakenings to something that was beautiful that would really kind of come full circle with Gail. So
Now, while followers of Jesus, girls, ends up being a beautiful part of the story, it's also kind of a difficult part of the story because Gail is trying to integrate her compartmentalized faith into life, and that begins to have an effect on you guys. What happened?
Well, we spent several months becoming good friends, and but also it was obvious that it was becoming more than that. And at the same time, I was realizing that even though I didn't really have what I understood as a relationship with Christ that I could have really talked about, I knew I wanted to be married to somebody who believed the same things I believed. And so, I think even looking back on my childhood and seeing the things that were missing in my childhood, I wanted to be able to bring God into my home and my marriage, and I wanted to be partnered with somebody who would do that. So I told Britt that I felt like we had gone probably as far as we could go, and that that we, because he didn't believe the things that I believed. It was a sad day, for me.
It was a really sad day, wasn't it?
Sad is not even close to the day that it was, okay? And so the context for this is the conversation that she had with me about this was the day before I flew to Southern California to take care of my dad, who had had a massive stroke at 48. And so I'm dropping out of grad school. I'm leaving. The one light place in my life is her. And we go on this nice date, and she says, I got to share something with you. It's like, you can say whatever you want. And she said, I just don't, this cannot continue because you don't believe the same things that I do. So it was a shock and awe moment for me. It just had no idea this was percolating in her mind. So in all of the hubris that was me as a 24-year-old at the time, I just said, whoa, stay calm, let's stay calm. I don't really know what I believe. Give me some time to figure it out. And I'm going to California, and I'll just have time to think through it. And I was immediately hatching a plan to, and it was a plan to just show that she was deceived. And so, do you want me to tell kind of the next morning?
Yeah. What was your plan here?
So, my plan was that obviously she was deceived, and a guy as sharp as me in grad school taking care of life as I was, could surely break through on that pretty easily, and then we would be able to resume the trajectory toward what I thought was marriage. So pretty simple task there. The next day when I met her and then headed to the airport, really good friends of ours now, who were good friends of hers then, gave her 2 books to hand to me. One was Basic Christianity by John Stott. One was Mere Christianity by C.S. Lewis. And then she gave me a Bible. And so I was armed with material, but what was on my mind was like, hey, great, just give me some fodder to look at, and then I'll be able to break it all down. And very early, so I'm in Southern California. I'm living with 3 former fraternity brothers who are working. I'm sleeping on their couch. I'm commuting down to see my dad as often as I can, who would be in a coma for 2 months, as it turned out. And then late at night, when the lights go out and the guys go to their rooms, I am cracking these books open. And John Stott, early in Basic Christianity, says, hey, the centerpiece of all of the things that people stumble on, the church, I'm paraphrasing, right? But the church, hypocrisy, all of that is not the issue. Christ is the issue. Remove Christ from Christianity, everything else falls away. You don't even need to waste your time with it. And I thought, that's right. I mean, that makes total sense. So let's get right into it and just disprove Jesus Christ as the center of Christianity. Go back to her, show her that case. It was Josh McDowell, right? I knew nothing about Josh McDowell, but basically I was on a little Josh McDowell journey to just take this thing off the table and then be able to go back and rationally say, can we now move forward?
And so how did that go for you, Pastor Britt?
Well, it was not what I expected, okay? I will just say that. I had the best intentions to do the worst damage. But I think there was an experience of God was seeking me. He was pursuing. So as I began to pursue him with the worst motives, truth began to pursue me. And Mere Christianity, if you're familiar with the book at all, C.S. Lewis, he doesn't talk about the gospel until late in the book. He talks early on about the moral law, the idea that right and wrong is everywhere. It's not taught, we know it. The remotest cultures, everywhere, there's a sense of what is right and wrong. And he says, where did that come from? That was a great question for me. Immediately gripped my mind with, where did that come from? So I'm totally immersed now in C.S. Lewis. I'm reading the Bible, beginning to get a picture of things. I'm journaling. I told Gail I would journal so I can show her the things that disprove Christianity. I don't want to just tell her. And my journaling is moving along, and a couple weeks in, it starts to change, just in what I'm writing and the kind of things that are coming alive to me. And I was coming alive to the gospel, and 6 weeks from landing in L.A., 6 weeks later, I had a born-again birthday on August 12th, 1981. So all by myself, right? Nobody knew this was going on. My friends didn't. My family didn't. It was just God and me, and so amazing.
Wow. Yep. So, with that cleared out of the way,
Yes.
the relationship moves forward, and you do end up getting married. What's early marriage like? You both now have a commitment to Christ. Is he really the center of your relationship at this point?
Well, no, I don't think, no, not at all. Neither of us really knew what that looked like. Neither of us really understood what it meant to lead well, to pursue Christ. But yeah, so we were stumbling through those early years of marriage. But we were, in many ways, we were both at the same place spiritually. But we also started going to church together in Seattle and sat under some wonderful teaching. So we were beginning to grow.
Yeah, I was clueless. I was like, okay, I don't know what I'm doing. So it was really a time of becoming centered. The first book that we got to sit under great teaching with was Galatians. So really fun that Tim just took us through Galatians. That was at University Presbyterian Church. Huge for me. I'm jumping into ministry. What's ministry? Prayer. Pray? Okay, that's weird. What, you sit around and, it was all brand new to me. And she was just kind of stepping into, all right, let's begin to get serious about things. So we were on a similar path together for sure.
Now, Gail, for you, part of that path was real difficult during those first 5 years. Talk a bit about that.
Well, Britt and I eventually moved to Port Angeles, and we'd been married about 5 years. And I experienced a time in my life where there was just a lot of loss, massive amount of loss. My dad died suddenly, my mom died suddenly, and Britt and I found out that we couldn't have children together. And this all happened with just within a few months of each other. And so for me, it just really, what it was just, it woke me up. I had been thinking happily, distractedly, that I could build my kingdom around me, and it made me realize, of course, that I couldn't. There was nothing I could hold on to. I remember feeling hopeless, and I didn't understand that, especially in light of my faith and who God is, and so I wanted to get to know him. A friend of mine had read Romans 8 to me while I was in the hospital with my mom, and just the words of hope just jumped out, and I said, I want to know who is the source of that hope. And I began to study his word. I got involved in Bible Study Fellowship, did years of that, and the written word led me to the living word. And yeah, I felt like I got to know him for the first time in my life.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of growth happens for you guys because you go from being a high school teacher in Port Angeles to eventually the journey leads you to Papua New Guinea. How do you get to Papua New Guinea?
Well, this is God, the story of God, the grace story of God in our lives. And before I share with that, we left this hanging first service. But many of you know we have a family. We have 2 sons who we adopted at birth, both adopted at birth under extraordinary circumstances. Their birth moms are just rock star hero women to us. 3 granddaughters, they're 31 and 27, our boys are. So God gave us a family. It just came through adoption, so in case you're wondering there. We were in Port Angeles. We were settling in for the long haul. I was teaching and coaching, had a ministry through just being in the public high school. Gail was working as a nurse and involved in Bible study fellowship, and we just felt like, okay, we found our space. And then just as we were attending Independent Bible Church with both her parents gone, we settled into church on a consistent basis. Began to get great teaching, to meet some of these people who were doing this mission work, and to learn about the God of mission, right? You all know I love talking about that. So understanding that, and then he began to do some things to say, yeah, you're not settling in for what you think. And it came kind of together all at once in a missions conference in '92, where the speaker at the conference at the end kind of did an altar call for anyone feeling like they are going to surrender to the God of mission and something unexpected. And we were one of 3 couples that stood up, and very close to those other 2 couples. And within 2 years, we were in training, and then 3 years later, we were in Papua New Guinea, starting a 13-year run there. So, I mean, we made our plans, and God determined our steps, and it just was not what we thought, but boy, wouldn't exchange it for anything.
Wow. And there are so many stories we could have you guys share about Papua New Guinea, and the day will come, I'm sure we get more of that. But one of the stories that struck me was, Gail, you shared how when your brother died, a little girl that already had some fears, fear began to be a major factor in your life. And now suddenly you are living in an alien culture on the other side of the world. I mean, I can only imagine for someone that deals with fear how much angst that could raise. Did that ever resolve? When? What happened? There's a story you told me that is just amazing.
Well, my fears were definitely magnified in that place. But one of my fears that had really magnified and actually become a phobia was my fear of flying. I was kind of that classic phobic person. I hated to fly. I missed my grandmother's funeral because I was too scared to get on an airplane. And of course, we had to fly to New Guinea, if you can believe that. So drugs come in handy. But one of my roles in New Guinea was I was working in the clinic there, and we had to do medevacs. Occasionally, we had to fly to Australia, which was our nearest emergency room. We had our own flight team. And I didn't go on those flights if I could help it. I usually sent the other nurses. But this was a particular night where I had to go. And we had a little baby who was about 6 months old, and he was hemorrhaging, and it was an emergency. He needed pediatric surgery. And so, as medevacs often are, we're flying not unsafely, but not in the greatest of conditions. And we had to fly that baby out in the middle of the night on a runway that didn't have any lights. And the cars kind of situate themselves and park so that their headlights are on the runway so the pilots can see. And we took off, and I was just terrified. And what happened, just by the grace of God, I think, is this: I had this deep awareness of his presence on that plane. That's all I can say, is that it just went to a very deep place. And with that, my fears went away. And he, at the same time, I feel like he was inviting me into, we have a baby to take care of. And I just saw how my fears were just wanting to protect myself and pull me away into my own little hole. But here was this baby that needed to be cared for. And so together, Jesus and I took care of that baby, and he did live. But what happened that night is that he delivered me from that fear. I don't know how he did it, other than just to say that fear and the presence of Christ, I don't think can coexist. And I've never been afraid to fly since.
Wow, that's a great story.
Yeah. To God be the glory.
Britt, one of the neat epilogues in some of your journey, you talked about the impact of your dad and his stroke. And he lived with some major handicap the rest of his life coming out of that. But that wasn't the end of his story, was it?
Yeah, so this was my dad. When he had the stroke, my parents divorced when I was in college. Both had remarried, and he is living kind of the life in the fast lane with his new wife in Southern California. So this thing landed in the midst of a pretty wild and crazy run for him. And when I walked into the room, that was the mortality piece for me, to see my dad in a coma, thinking, there's no way, you know. And what about me then? So God factored that in hugely for my life. But he ended up moving through the system in the veterans home system. He was a Korea vet, was a medic there. And so he ended up at Yountville Veterans Home in Napa. Beautiful, it's an amazing place there in the wine country. And somehow got connected to a small church community there with a chaplain who loved Jesus. And he ended up coming to Jesus. He gave his life to Jesus. While we were in New Guinea, my dad meets Christ. And so we come back, and I go down and kind of catch up to this, and of course, amazing to me. So that set him off on a new path, even with his disability and kind of the way the stroke has damaged his body. He begins to connect in ways that are now bringing life to other people, nurses and caregivers and the church singing in the choir, just all this amazing stuff. So that the way that God redeemed it all in the last few years of his life, where really his health was failing, he had his most significant impact for life and in other people because he was all about Jesus in those last few years. And he's the only one. I have a nephew. My dad came to Christ and passed, and that's it for my family. So we're still, being the presence of Christ to a whole lot of my extended family that don't know him. But boy, did it turn out beautifully for my dad in that way. So I'll see him again. We'll get to talk about that and enjoy it together. So
That's great. We're going to have to wrap this up, but if people could take one takeaway home with them, something remembered from your story, what would you like for them to remember?
Well, I just feel like my words are so inadequate to convey the goodness of God. His grace in our lives has been relentless. I would hope that you would see and know that he is a good shepherd. One of the ways that God has, there's been those moments like on the airplane where it was just him and me, but more often he has brought grace into our lives through people. And many of you have been incarnated that grace into our lives, and this church as a whole has incarnated that grace to us. And so I guess as a takeaway to just tell you to keep doing that. Keep doing what you're doing.
yeah, so his ways are so high beyond ours, right? But you all know, if you've been around, I love talking about hesed, right? Loving kindness. This great idea of loyal love and covenant loyalty, which we see in the Old Testament like crazy. And then when Jesus comes, we don't need to hear about it anymore. He is the Hesed of God. And for me, that was the story, that loyal love pursuing me at a time when I was so far away. I wanted nothing to do with anything that would take away my control of my life. And God still pursued me. And so that's a great takeaway, but I would also add now in my role as a pastor and my journey with children and families is seeing that move through generations. And I just think we cannot be reminded enough about how our lives in Christ affect generations, generationally. We're in time, I get that, but when we pour into kids and grandkids, we move the gospel forward in time. And if you were here yesterday for Bryce's memorial, I just saw that so much into his granddaughters and thinking that's, as moms, they're going to remember Bryce's testimony and just some powerful things that have to do with the legacy we can leave, not only here in our community, but through our kids and grandkids, that allows the gospel to reach on through time. And I think that's a great takeaway for us to be mindful of.
That's good. Well, you guys, we are so thrilled that God has chosen to weave your story into ours. And thanks for sharing.
Yeah, to God be the glory. Thank you.
Well, our next guest is somebody that actually took a job that I thought I wanted like 25 plus years ago. And but I'm really glad that he got that job. And eventually, we got to be colleagues and work together. And I'd like to invite Pastor Wayne Yamamoto to come up and share. We're kind of doing staff sharing day today. Why are they laughing, Wayne? Oh, yeah, that cute little guy up there. Which one is you?
Well, I know all us Asians look Mike, but I've got the one with the stink eye going. It's my brother Brian. He's the serious one. He's the dentist in Alaska, and I turned out to be a youth pastor, so there I am.
There you are. Where did you, it really is true that, I mean, like 25 plus years ago, we were in Southern California, and I think we actually were up here on vacation at one point and found out that DCC was looking to hire a new youth pastor. And I thought at the time, oh, that might be something I'd be interested in. I never actually put my hat in the ring, but by the time I knew they were looking, they had already hired you. So that was that. Where did you grow up?
I grew up in Southern California, South Bay area, Torrance area, and my family is from California. My mom was up in the Santa Maria area. My dad was L.A., and so we resided there in the South Bay. And
Okay.
yeah, great place to grow up back in the 50s and 60s.
So what kind of stuff did life revolve around for you as a kid?
My father had a scholarship to USC to play baseball, and the war broke out. And so he ended up going to relocation camp. They called it camp in Arizona. When we were kids, he put a baseball in our hands, and we played ball. All five of us. Well, four boys. I don't think my sister played. But yeah, we played a lot of sports. Gravitated towards football. I don't know how that happened at 5'6", but played a little football. 6 years of football. So.
Okay. Spiritually, anything going on for you at that age?
It's interesting. My mom made sure that the four boys went to church, and there was another family about a mile away, and they would load up the station wagons, and there would be 8 of us that would go to a church called Christ Lutheran in San Pedro off of Western Avenue. And as a matter of fact, I was just down there doing my mother's memorial service. She passed away. And the cemetery that I used to walk through on the way to junior high is where we had the service. And I was sharing with the people at the memorial service how my brothers kind of had me left behind at church when I was about 4.5, 5 years old. Because there were so many kids in the car. I know my mother said, okay, do we have everybody? And I'm sure my brother said, oh, yeah, we have everybody. And I was left at church. So if you can imagine being 4.5, 5 years old, and I was smart enough to walk out to where the parking lot went on to Western Avenue, and I watched every car that went by. And the last car went by and didn't even stop and ask, hey, what's the deal? So I had been left behind. I started walking down Western Avenue, and I pointed out to the people at the memorial service. I said, I got all the way to this point right here on Western Avenue when I saw my mom come pick me up. And it was about a mile that I walked as a 5-year-old.
So you walk a mile by yourself down the road.
Down the road. I knew the way home. I just had that GPS system in my brain, and I knew the way home. So I got about 1/4 of the way there.
and you told me that your mom spots you and
Oh, she was happy to see me, but I was way thrilled to see her. I had tears of joy in my eyes until I got home, and then I was a little mad at my brothers for. Of course, they were nowhere to be found. Where are they?
Yeah.
Oh, we left Wayne?
Yeah. Oh man. Okay, so spiritually, really not much going on up through high school. You get into college. Where'd you go to college, and what were you studying?
Well, I started out at San Diego State University in '73, and was doing quite well in business. My dad was an accountant. My oldest brother was an accountant, so I figured, well, they make good money. I might as well just go into accounting. I remember a high school teacher telling my mom he's going into accounting. He's got way too much personality to be an accountant. Well, my mom took offense at that, and because she wanted me to make lots of money, and so I went into accounting and actually did quite well, and got an A in the fundamental class, which over 50% of the students dropped out by midterm. And but I started doing some bad things and started drinking and doing things that I wasn't supposed to be doing, and eventually I kind of lost my way. And at that point in my life, I decided I didn't want to go to school. I wanted to surf, and San Diego was a place to surf. But the dream was always to go to the North Shore and surf in Hawaii. So that's what I did. I packed my boards up, saved some money, and moved over to the island of Kauai. And
So you didn't finish college at that point?
I did not finish college. No, I did not. And I have 2.5 years of accounting classes. So I know debits and credits.
You know which one goes on the left and on the right.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So you go to Hawaii. You're now going to live the dream. You're going to surf.
I lived the dream. I just the first week was phenomenal. Just big waves and beautiful beaches. Kauai was pretty quiet back then. The word was they rolled the sidewalks up at 4 o'clock, which was true. And so I stayed there for about 2.5 months. But I just had this real sinking feeling in my soul that, the very thing that I thought would bring joy in life turned on me, and there was no joy. And so...
How did it turn on you? When you say it turned on you?
I expected... I don't know what I was thinking was going to happen when I moved to Hawaii. I just thought that it was just going to be the paradise and everything would be wonderful. And it was for about 2 weeks. And then after that, I thought, man, there has to be more to life than recreation.
So you came back.
Came back to California, and my parents were gracious, and they let me back. I was able to stay at the house there, and started going to work. And also, I read a book that changed my life. As a matter of fact, on sabbatical, I read one of Madeleine L'Engle's books. While I was on sabbatical, that and Oz Guinness. But the book that I read when I came back is called A Wrinkle in Time. And that book just really spoke to my soul. And so it stirred me up. And I went back to the Lutheran church, and all my junior high buddies were there, but there wasn't any life. At least I didn't see much life. And so I heard about this church called Calvary Chapel down in Costa Mesa. And my brother had been down there when he was in high school. I'd passed it numerous times on my way to San Clemente. And so I thought, I'm going to go down there. They've got to have, and they had something going every night. So I went down there on a Saturday night. I'm pretty sure it was Saturday night. And they had a concert. And I'm by myself, and I'm standing in line, and these Marines from Camp Pendleton said, hey, you by yourself? I said, yes, I am. He goes, why don't you sit with us? So I sat with them during the concert, and I found out at the end of the service that they were praying for me, and they waited for me to come out after I'd given my life to Christ, and they prayed with me after, gave me big hugs. I'm sure I'll see him when I get to glory. But so that was part of the ordeal coming back to Southern Cal.
So God called out the Marines to rescue the guy on the
Yeah, oh
beach.
man. Oh yes, he did. And you know the crazy side of the story is being a surfer. Before Camp Pendleton was public, we would have to drive by Trestle. Trestles. There's 3 or 4 breaks there at Trestles, and we couldn't get in because the Marine Corps owned that land. And I think it was somewhere in the 70s, they opened it up publicly. So we always despised Marines, but those guys, they love me, and God bless them.
Wow.
Yeah.
So what changed?
What changed? Everything changed. Started going to church regularly, and just read every book I possibly could. And just really, God was just speaking to me about things in my life that needed to change, and it was a real deal. Yeah.
Wow. So then you went back to school.
Went back to Cal Poly Pomona. Rich Still and I are the two that were the Cal Poly Pomona guys, and went back to school for agriculture.
Okay. And when you finished that, you end up talking to a friend who tells you about a job in Idaho.
Actually, it was before I finished. I was with a high school buddy, and he and I got together, and I said, "So what are you doing this summer?" He goes, "I got a job up in Idaho fighting fires." And so he goes, "You want a job?" I said, "Sure." Idaho, never been there. So I went up for a summer, and summer turned out to 6 months, and figured I need to finish my degree and get back to Idaho.
Okay. So then you went to work, I think, for the Forestry Service up there?
Correct.
And were you involved with the church at that point?
No, I was living up in the woods and hunting, fishing, doing all the recreational things, backpacking for the first year. And then the second year, they told me that I had been transferred to the supervisor's office downtown. And at that point, I started attending Cole Community Church. A good buddy of mine just sent me an email. He was on the same fire crew, and he invited me to Cole, and that's where I ended up.
Huh. So where in this journey did you meet Risa?
Well, the same buddy that I worked with in the Forest Service was getting married, and I was invited to the wedding, and so I went, and the wedding service was over, and it was time to go to the reception. And I walk outside the door, and here's this beautiful girl, beautiful lady. I said, "Why are you going to the reception?" She says, "I don't know how to get there." Now, the way she would tell it is that I said, "Well, follow me," and she's been following me ever since. So we went to the reception. We talked to each other the whole time. There were people around us, and we just sat at the table and just talked. And being the slow mover that I am, I did get her phone number, and I called her an hour later after the reception.
So you waited. You kind of let it settle.
I waited,
good.
made sure she knew who I was, and then I said, "Hey, would you like to go to a Shakespeare play?" So we went. Shakespeare, I don't know. I can't remember which one it was. It was Midsummer's Night Dream? I can't remember, but we got there. Little did I know, this is an embarrassing moment, I've got to share it. Little did I know what the price was, so I figured, I got $25, $30, that's enough. Well, it wasn't. So she's been bailing me out ever since.
So you guys hit it off, and you got married in 1982.
82.
Okay.
No, 82. Yeah, 82.
How many years have you been married, Risa?
What day was it? June 5th.
Oh, that's great. You kept working for the Forest Service until 84, and then you ended up working as an intern at Cole Community, right?
Right.
And how did that come about? How did you make that transition?
Well, I actually started in '79. There was a class that I was taking, and they said, "Hey, here's the tuition for the class." Dave Roper was teaching 2 classes, and you can pay this, or you can volunteer for a ministry. So I volunteered for the junior high ministry, and ended up working with junior hires up until '84, and at that point, they decided when I decided to go into the intern program in the house seminary there, they said, why don't you run the junior high ministry while you're doing the program?
That was a pretty large ministry, wasn't it? What was...
Well, you know, it was about 40, 50 students. When we left, I've got a picture in my office that one of my former students gave me, and I think there's about 130 kids in the picture. It was pretty
130
wild.
junior hires.
Junior hires, yeah.
That's 260 high schoolers, yeah. So you then were at Cole. I understand at one point you thought you were going to go overseas,
That's correct.
but then you ended up staying on staff at Cole.
Right. There were just everybody kept telling me that student ministry was a place that I needed to be, and my wife really wanted to go overseas. We did go to Papua New Guinea in the jungles for 4 weeks, and but the youth ministry was just compelling, and it was. I think God really wanted me there, so that's what I've been doing that's what I did for quite a few years.
Yeah, there, and then you came to DCC in '94, and then
Correct.
2012 you moved out of youth and started working with adult ministry, specifically to build up our men's ministry, which you've done just a wonderful job. If people are going to take home a takeaway from your story, what would be one thing you would want them to remember?
Well, there's quite a few things that I think the Lord has reminded me of over the years. I think the one thing that really has stood out to me recently is hearing His voice and letting Him work in your life. Junior high ministry, never thought that would be part of who I am or what God created me to do. Moving to Sequim, Washington, we came through here in '82 from Victoria on our honeymoon, and who would have thought that I'd ever be in Sequim, Washington? So God has a way of speaking to our souls and reminding us of what's eternal and what's important. And so I would just say that, when you hear His voice, really pay attention.
You just finished sabbatical. One of the very generous things that this church has instituted is once every 7 years, pastors are allowed to take a 3-month sabbatical just to regroup and think through and decide what the next steps of life should be. What did you come back from sabbatical with?
Well, this will have been my third sabbatical, and this one was a little different. And I think what the church has been so gracious to allow us to take time off, and just have really enjoyed the time off. This particular sabbatical, it really became evident to me that I'm going to be 64 here in a short while next month, and I realized that I'm really slowing down. And having watched mentors go through this process, I realized that at some point you have to turn the reins over. And at 60, coming up on 64, I'm just feeling the pull to do that.
So you're planning sometime this year to retire.
Yeah.
All right. And we don't have a date for that yet.
We do not have a date, so we'll see how God leads.
Yeah, just having a discussion.
Mm-hmm.
Well, Wayne, as I said in the first service, I'll say again, you have had and continue to have such a significant impact in the church body. I know for Burnett and I, all of our kids went through the youth program with you as a youth pastor, and I still remember our oldest son speaking at his graduation and challenging his classmates to give themselves in service. Mm-hmm. And he spoke as a Christian, serving others, and where I really saw him catch that vision was the service trips that you took those kids on and how you modeled that and taught it to them. Mm-hmm. And I think I can say for all of us just a huge thank you for the investment that you have made of your life and your time into this congregation. And as far as we know, you're not going anywhere. You're still going to stick around.
No, we're sticking around. And, it's just been a blessing. I look back on the years and I think, God was so faithful and gave me the opportunity. He's the one that causes growth, and I hope I just never forget that my responsibility is to be faithful with what God has given me and blessed me with, and let Him do the growing, and that's been a wonderful blessing.
That has been. Hey, can we just pray together? Father, I just thank you so much for Wayne, just what a friend he has been, for the impact of his life in this church. God, impact I know is going to keep on going. And I just ask for your blessing, your leading for him in knowing what the next chapter is, what your plans are for him. And I pray for us as a church, too, as we walk through this process together, that you'd give us clarity as to the next steps for us as well. God, just thank you for your grace, the amazing ways that you work in bringing our stories together. And just thank you so much for Wayne and Risa and how their lives are impacting ours. And we just give you all the praise. In Jesus' name, amen. Wayne, thank you, man.